The Alpha King pretends to be blind to test his staff, until his new maid surprises him. Its dark spires pierce the sky, and the walls, blackened by centuries of storms, seem to hum with secrets. Within, King Kale, young yet already feared, walked the corridors with a careful, deliberate pace. Though he appeared blind, moving as if guided only by sound and touch, every step was measured, every gesture precise. No one outside the inner circle knew that his eyes could see, that his vision was sharp and penetrating. He had chosen this deception for one reason alone: to test the hearts of those who served him. In a court where loyalty was rare and betrayal common, Kale needed to know who would falter, who would deceive, and who would rise to stand true when darkness fell. This morning, the servants moved quickly through the grand halls, polishing floors, dusting chandeliers, and adjusting tapestries with the nervous care of those who knew the king's eyes, real or not, could pierce their very souls. The sound of his cane tapping echoed off the stone, a slow, rhythmic drum that marked his passage. Some stopped in their tracks, whispering apologies. Others pretended ignorance, hoping to escape notice. Yet today, among the familiar faces, there was a new presence, a maid named Alara. She entered the castle with quiet confidence, carrying a tray of linens for the kitchens. Her hair was dark as midnight, her eyes unusually sharp, and her movements precise. She did not glance fearfully at the king's cane. She did not flinch at the whispered warnings of other servants. She simply walked, observing, listening, learning. Kale paused, hearing her approach. His sharp mind measured her, her breathing, the subtle shift of weight, the way she balanced the tray without wobble. She was not like the others. Already he suspected she might see beyond his false blindness. "Ah, a new face," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Come closer." Alara halted, bowing her head slightly, but her eyes, bright and unflinching, met his. "Yes, your majesty," she replied. Her voice was steady, polite, yet carried a faint undertone of curiosity, as if she, too, wished to understand the one who ruled from shadows. Kale's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. A servant with courage, perhaps even insight, this was rare. He let her approach, letting the cane swing lazily by his side. "I am testing the loyalty of my staff," he said, though his words were veiled in casual observation. "Tell me, what would you do if you saw another servant steal from the castle?" Alara set the tray down carefully, her hands steady. "I would report it," she answered, "not out of fear of punishment, but because it is the right thing to do." Kale's smile deepened, though his eyes betrayed nothing. "And if that servant was favored by the queen?" he asked softly, watching her reaction. Alara hesitated for a heartbeat, a flicker of thought crossing her face, then answered, "Then I would still speak the truth. Loyalty to the kingdom comes before loyalty to one person." A long silence followed, broken only by the distant clatter of the kitchens and the faint hiss of wind through the castle's stone windows. Kale listened not just to her words but to the tone, the rhythm, the honesty in her voice. Most would have faltered. Most would have fumbled, offering excuses or lies. Not her. He inclined his head. "You are unlike the others," he said, voice lower now, almost a whisper. "Keep your senses sharp, Alara. The castle is not as it seems." She blinked, curiosity sparking in her eyes. "What do you mean, your majesty?" Kale let a pause hang, filled with the weight of unspoken secrets. "Shadows have a way of moving where no one sees them. Walls hold whispers. Not all who serve you are as they appear. Watch, listen, and above all, survive." Alara's lips pressed into a thin line and she nodded, understanding more than he expected. There was a steadiness about her, a resolve that made him cautious and intrigued. That evening, the castle's great hall became the stage for Kale's first subtle test. Servants carried candles, arranged silverware, and prepared the chamber for the night feast. Kale sat at the head of the long, carved table, his hands resting lightly on the cane. His eyes, though they appeared dim and unfocused, roamed the room with precision, noting every gesture, every hesitation. A tray of wine was brought forward by a young servant, nervous and trembling. Cale's hand hovered as if sensing rather than seeing. "Careful," he said softly. "The goblet, balance it. Do you hear?" The boy faltered, and the goblet tipped dangerously. Alara nearby moved swiftly, steadying the tray before the wine could spill. Cale's lips twitched in a ghost of amusement. Most servants would have fumbled or hesitated, waiting for orders. She acted instinctively, correcting the mistake with quiet efficiency. "Thank you," he murmured, almost to himself. "You have good instincts." Alara glanced at him briefly, then returned to her work, as if she hadn't expected praise. And yet, that fleeting look, the one that acknowledged his observation, sent a ripple of awareness through Cale. He had seen many faces, many expressions, but hers held both caution and courage, curiosity and comprehension. Later, Cale wandered the northern corridors, where the castle walls were thick with moss and shadows gathered like living things. Here fewer servants dared to tread, and the whispers of the castle's history seemed louder. He could hear the soft scuff of footsteps, Alara following at a respectful distance. "You move quietly," he said. "Most are clumsy, even in their obedience." Alara bowed her head slightly. "I learned to move without drawing attention," she said. "It is easier to survive that way." Cale paused, the sound of her words settling in his mind. Survival, a simple word but weighted with meaning in a castle such as this. "And do you trust easily?" he asked. "No," she admitted honestly. "But I watch, I listen, I learn who is worthy of trust." He smiled faintly, though the gesture never reached his eyes. He was unaccustomed to servants who spoke truth without fear, who did not grovel or embellish. And yet here was one who understood instinctively the balance of caution and loyalty. The wind howled through the cracks in the stone, carrying with it an icy chill. Cale stopped near a window, tracing a finger along the cool stone. "There are forces in this castle that will test you, Alara," he said. "Not all shadows are harmless. Some are very old, very cunning, and they remember." Alara's eyes widened not with fear but recognition. "I have seen things," she said softly, "in the forests near my home. Spirits, whispers, and creatures that watch from the dark. I was not afraid then, and I am not afraid now." Cale regarded her carefully. Her courage was rare, almost dangerous in its purity. He knew instinctively that she might be the one person capable of withstanding the true darkness of his castle, and perhaps even touching something in him that had long been buried. Days passed, and Cale continued his tests. Small traps, subtle lies, whispered warnings, each meant to reveal character. Alara passed each trial not through luck, but through perception and intuition. She noticed details others ignored. A misaligned candle, a soft footstep in the corridor, a faint scent of something amiss in the kitchens. One evening, as the last light of sunset spilled through the tall windows, Cale found her in the library, the largest room in the castle. She was arranging books, her fingers brushing lightly across the spines, pausing to read titles aloud in a soft, melodic voice. "Books are dangerous here," Cale said, his voice echoing softly. "They contain knowledge that could betray you if wielded carelessly." Alara looked up, her expression calm, unafraid. "Knowledge is never dangerous," she replied. "Only ignorance is." Cale's lips curved into a subtle, almost imperceptible smile. A servant with wisdom, courage, and intuition, rare indeed. Yet more than all that, there was something about her that unsettled him, a quiet defiance that refused to bend before fear or power. As he listened to her, Cale realized that this test was no longer about the loyalty of the staff. It had become a test of himself. Could he allow someone close, someone unafraid to see him as he truly was? Could he risk trust when trust had always been a weapon against him? That night, Cale returned to his chambers, the corridors silent and thick with fog. He paused at a high balcony overlooking the courtyard. The moon cast a pale light on the stone, and the shadows seemed to sway as though alive. And then he heard it, a whisper, faint and almost imperceptible. Not a voice of a servant, not the rustle of wind, but something else, something that trembled between fear and recognition. Alara stood below, gazing upward, her hands folded lightly in front of her. She did not startle at his voice, did not retreat at his presence. She merely looked as if she had been waiting for him. Most would run, Kale said softly, his voice carrying in the cool night air. I do not fear what I do not understand, she replied. But I listen and I learn. Kale felt a strange warmth he had not known in years, a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and something deeper, more perilous. A part of him, buried beneath centuries of suspicion and solitude, longed to reach across the distance between them. Yet he remained silent, watching, testing still. For even now he knew that in this castle of shadows, where loyalty and betrayal danced like flame and smoke, nothing could be trusted, except perhaps this one extraordinary maid. As he turned away, the moonlight caught the edge of her cloak, glinting like silver. Kale knew, with a certainty that made his pulse quicken, that the real test had only just begun, and that Alara was far more than she seemed. The castle held its breath, waiting. The castle of Aelthorn had a rhythm that only those who lived within its walls truly understood. Its corridors breathed like a living creature, whispering secrets and carrying warnings on the wind. King Kale moved through the halls with the careful precision of a predator, yet tonight he was aware of something new. The subtle presence of Alara, the maid whose courage and perception had already unsettled him. It had been days since he had first observed her. Each trial he set, each test of loyalty, she had passed with a quiet brilliance that made him both wary and fascinated. The court whispered rumors of the new maid, calling her clever, fearless, and unnervingly composed. None of this surprised Kale. He had seen the truth beneath appearances from the start. What intrigued him now was not her skill, but the way she seemed to see through him. The evening was heavy with fog, and the castle's great hall was lit by torches that flickered against the ancient stone. Servants hurried about their duties, trying to anticipate the king's unseen demands. Kale's cane tapped softly on the floor as he made his way to the throne, though his eyes, sharp and discerning, took in every movement, every hesitation. Alara entered the hall shortly after, carrying a tray of polished silverware. She did not bow low or avert her gaze, and for the first time, Kale felt a tug of respect mingled with something unfamiliar, interest. You move with purpose, he remarked, his voice calm but carrying an edge of authority. Most in my court merely act out of fear. You act deliberately. Alara paused, setting the tray down carefully. I do what is needed, she said. Her voice was soft but firm, carrying a quiet confidence. Fear is useful only when it teaches caution, not when it drives weakness. Kale's lips twitched, a small smile threatening to break through his usual mask of sternness. Few spoke to him in such a manner. Fewer still managed to make him listen. He leaned slightly forward, pretending to adjust the folds of his cloak. Tell me, he said, do you ever question those in power, or do you obey blindly as is expected in a palace? Alara lifted her chin, unflinching. I observe first. I obey only when I am certain it is right. Blind obedience is dangerous. It serves only those who would take advantage of the unaware. Kale allowed himself a small nod. Such courage, such clarity, it was rare in anyone, even those born of noble blood. And yet with Alara there was more. Something hidden, something unspoken, lingered just beneath the surface, and it called to him in a way he did not understand. Later that night, Kale summoned her to the northern wing of the castle, a place few servants dared enter. The corridors were narrow, the walls damp with centuries of mist, and the torches sputtered, casting long shadows that moved like living things. I have a task for you, Kale said, his voice low and steady. The northern wing holds many secrets, some that should not be disturbed. Your task is simple: observe, take note of what is out of place, report nothing, yet notice everything. Alara inclined her head. "I will do as you command, your majesty," she said. Yet her eyes betrayed curiosity, and a faint spark of excitement danced in their depths. Kale allowed her to walk ahead, her footsteps soft against the stone floor. He followed a short distance behind, listening, testing, learning. The castle seemed to shift as they moved, the shadows bending closer, the air growing colder. Kale was aware of every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind, yet he was equally aware of Alara's presence. She moved with a grace that seemed almost supernatural, noticing details he himself had overlooked. "Most would have missed that," he murmured, gesturing subtly toward a small gap in the wall where faint scratches marred the stone. "Do you see it?" Alara examined the marks carefully. "Someone has been here," she said softly. "Recently." And they were cautious but not careful enough. The scratches are fresh and the dust disturbed. Kale's eyes narrowed slightly, impressed. "Good, very good," he said. "Few can read the castle as you do." Her lips pressed together briefly. "I have learned to read silence," she said simply. "It speaks louder than words." Kale felt a strange pull at his chest. Her words were simple, yet they carried weight. In the past, few had understood the language of silence, of subtle truths hidden in shadows. And now here she was, seeing the things that others missed, feeling the things that others ignored. The days that followed were filled with a series of trials, each more subtle than the last. Kale watched from his shadowed chambers as Alara navigated the palace, correcting mistakes, noticing threats, and quietly proving her worth. One evening, the king placed a delicate crystal vase near the edge of a table, its position precarious. He watched as Alara entered with a tray of linens. The vase tipped slightly, and most servants would have ignored it, waiting for instructions. But she moved instinctively, steadying it with a calm hand before it could fall. Kale's lips curved into a faint smile. "Impressive," he said under his breath. "You act when others hesitate. You see when others are blind." Later, during a quiet moment in the library, Kale approached her while she organized scrolls. The firelight danced across the walls, casting shadows that seemed to move with their own purpose. "You are not afraid," Kale said softly. "Of me, of the castle, of the shadows that linger here." Alara looked up, meeting his gaze. "Fear is useful only when it teaches you," she said. "Otherwise, it is a chain." Kale's hand rested lightly on the back of a chair, but his mind was elsewhere. He had not encountered a soul like hers in years, someone who could meet darkness with reason rather than panic. "And yet," he said, "most who claim courage are broken the moment true darkness appears." She smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but those who prepare for it, who understand it, can withstand more than you imagine." That night, a messenger arrived with urgent news. One of the king's advisors, a man long trusted, had been overheard plotting in the shadows. Kale listened carefully as the servant reported the incident. Most kings would have immediately punished the traitor, but Kale had learned to observe first. He called Alara quietly. "Follow me," he instructed, and she obeyed without question. They moved through the castle corridors, silent and aware, like shadows themselves. Kale stopped before a small chamber where the traitor had been hiding. He gestured for Alara to enter first. "Notice everything," he whispered. "Do not touch anything. Do not speak unless I ask." She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. She noticed a folded letter on the desk, the subtle imprint of footprints on the floor, the faint scent of a candle that had been recently extinguished. She moved carefully, her presence quiet yet certain. After a moment, she looked at him. "He planned to strike tonight," she said, "and he underestimated you." Kale's lips curved into a small smile. "Indeed, and yet few would notice the signs. You do." The following days brought a change in the court's atmosphere. Whispers circulated, rumors spread, and the staff became increasingly uneasy. Kale continued his subtle tests, watching how they reacted to pressure, temptation, and fear. Through it all, Alara remained steadfast, her presence a constant reminder that courage and loyalty were not entirely extinct in his kingdom. Kale found himself thinking of her often, in ways he did not fully understand. There was a pull, a curiosity that went beyond mere interest. He began to observe her not only as a servant or a subject, but as someone capable of understanding the darkness that lingered within him, someone who might even challenge it. One evening, as the moon rose high above the castle, Kale found Alara in the northern garden, a hidden space where few dared to tread. She was studying the ancient statues, her fingers brushing lightly over the cold stone. "You are fearless," Kale said quietly, appearing beside her. Alara did not startle. "I have learned that fear is often a choice," she replied. "To survive, one must see the truth, no matter how dark it is." Kale nodded slowly, feeling a weight he had not known for years. Trust, he realized, was far more difficult than ruling a kingdom. Yet in her presence it felt possible. As the wind rustled through the garden, Kale heard a faint whisper, not a human voice but something older, something that had lingered in the shadows of the castle for centuries. Alara's head tilted slightly, her eyes narrowing. "Do you hear that?" she asked softly. Kale did not answer. Instead, he felt it, a pulse in the air, a presence moving unseen. His hand brushed lightly against his cane, and for the first time in years he felt uncertainty. "Alara," he said, his voice low and controlled, "there are secrets in this castle older than any of us, and some of them are awake tonight." She stepped closer, unafraid, her gaze steady. "Then we face them together," she said. Kale's chest tightened. The shadows of the castle seemed to lean closer, listening. And in that moment he realized that this Maid, the one who had already seen through his mask, might be the only one who could survive the darkness alongside him. The castle held its breath. The night was not yet over. And for Kale, the real test, the one of trust, courage, and perhaps something far deeper, had only just begun. The castle of Aelthorn had grown heavier in the last few nights, as if the stones themselves remembered long-forgotten sorrows. Shadows clung to the corners of hallways, stretching unnaturally under the flicker of torchlight. King Kale felt their weight as he walked, his cane tapping against the cold stone, every echo a reminder that some secrets would not stay buried. He had sensed a shift ever since Alara had arrived. Her presence was like a flame in the dark corridors, steady, unyielding, yet capable of revealing truths that the castle tried to hide. And now Kale felt a new unease stirring. A curse long tied to his bloodline was awakening, reaching through the walls, the air, and even the shadows themselves. Alara moved beside him in the northern wing, her steps careful yet confident. "The castle feels different tonight," she said softly, her eyes scanning the dark corridors. "The air heavier, like something is waiting." Kale nodded, his senses sharpened by years of vigilance. "It is not just the air," he said. "The curse of my lineage stirs. It is older than any servant, older than these stones, and it watches." Alara's gaze did not waver. "Then we must watch it back," she said simply. There was something in her calm, her courage, that pulled at Kale's heart. He had never trusted anyone so completely. Yet here she was, fearless, steady, and aware of dangers he had kept hidden for decades. He wanted to warn her of the horrors that lay ahead, yet he knew words would not prepare her for what was coming. The first sign of the curse appeared in the form of whispers. At first they were soft, almost musical, floating through the halls at night. But soon the whispers grew louder, twisting into voices that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. Some spoke of betrayal, some of secrets, and some of Kale. One evening, Kale and Alara were in the grand library, poring over ancient scrolls. He had begun to suspect that Alara's own past was connected to the mystical forces within the castle. Her ability to sense the unseen, to move with precision and instinct, was no ordinary skill. "Alara," Kale said quietly, "have you ever felt something watching you? Not a person, but a presence." Her eyes met his, unwavering. "Yes," she replied. "When I was a child, I felt it in the forests near my home. Spirits, shadows, some of them tried to frighten me, but others, they seemed to test me to see if I was worthy. Kale's hand rested lightly on a tome, his fingers tracing the faded runes. The castle does the same. It tests everyone who enters. Some fail, some survive, and some, he paused, meeting her gaze, are capable of changing its course. Alara's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. Then we must be among the ones who survive, she said softly. Kale nodded, feeling a pull he could not explain. Her words were more than courage. They were a challenge, a promise, and perhaps even a warning. That night, the castle grew colder than usual. The torches flickered violently as if struggling against some unseen force. Kale moved through the corridors, his cane tapping softly, every sense alert. Alara followed, silent and steady. They entered a hall that had long been sealed, where dust and cobwebs had gathered over centuries. The air was thick, heavy with something old and restless. And then they saw it, a shadow moving against the wall, independent of any light source. Kale froze, listening. The shadow shifted, coiled, and seemed almost alive. "Do not fear it," he whispered to Alara. "Many cannot withstand it. Most break under its gaze." Alara's eyes did not falter. She stepped closer to the shadow, her hands brushing lightly over the air as if feeling its shape. "It is testing us," she said. "I can feel it. It is curious, waiting for us to act." Kale's pulse quickened. Few had faced the castle's ancient forces directly. Fewer still had faced them with understanding instead of panic. And now, standing beside him, Alara seemed to draw strength from the darkness rather than fear it. The shadow moved again, coiling toward them, but she did not step back. She extended a hand, and Kale watched, fascinated as it hovered near the shape. The shadow recoiled slightly, as if acknowledging her courage. Kale realized then that she was not merely a servant. She was a force of her own, someone capable of facing the same darkness that had haunted him his entire life. In the following days, the curse began to manifest more openly. Doors would slam without wind, whispers followed them through the halls, and strange symbols appeared etched into stone where no one could have placed them. The staff grew uneasy, some whispering that the castle itself was alive and angry. Kale's advisors urged him to act, to banish Alara or lock her away for her own safety. But he refused. He knew that her presence was not a threat. She was a key, perhaps the only one capable of confronting what lay ahead. One evening, while the staff slept, Kale and Alara explored the deepest part of the castle, the old dungeons, where the stones were blackened with age and the air smelled of iron and shadow. The corridors twisted and turned like a labyrinth, each corner revealing another secret. "Alara," Kale whispered, "you must trust me completely. These shadows, they can sense fear, they can sense doubt. If you falter, even for a moment," she met his gaze steadily. "I trust you, Kale, but you must trust me as well. I have seen forces like this before. I know how to endure." Kale felt a pang of something unfamiliar, relief, mingled with admiration. Few could speak to him with such certainty, let alone in the face of the unknown. He realized he had begun to depend on her, not only for survival but for something more fragile, more dangerous: hope. Their journey took them to a chamber deep within the castle, where the air shimmered with an unnatural light. Ancient runes glowed faintly along the walls, and a strange hum resonated through the floor. The shadow manifested fully here, coalescing into a shape that was neither human nor entirely spirit. It spoke without words, a presence that pressed against their minds. Kale felt fear rising, a cold, heavy weight that threatened to crush him. But Alara stepped forward, unshaken, her hand brushing against the shadow. "You test us," she whispered. "But we are not afraid. We face what must be faced. We endure." The shadow recoiled slightly, then seemed to merge with her energy, as if recognizing strength and courage in her. Kale watched in awe, realizing that Alara's own abilities were somehow intertwined with the castle's ancient magic. She was not just surviving, It was as if she were shaping the forces around her. Kale felt something shift within himself. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel more than command and control. He felt connection, admiration, and something dangerous and beautiful, trust. That night, after the shadow withdrew into the walls, Kale and Alara sat in the northern garden, a hidden courtyard illuminated by the pale moon. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet stone and cold flowers. "You are unlike anyone I have ever known," Kale said quietly. "You see what others cannot, you feel what others ignore, and yet you remain steadfast." Alara smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the silver moonlight. "And you are unlike any ruler I have served," she replied. "You are cautious, commanding, and yet you carry a loneliness I cannot ignore." Kale felt his chest tighten. No one had ever spoken to him like this, acknowledged the solitude he had hidden behind power and fear. "Loneliness," he said softly, "is part of ruling. It keeps one sharp, vigilant. It keeps one alive." "Alive," Alara echoed, "but not free." "You may rule, Kale, but you do not live, not truly. Not until you allow someone to stand beside you." The words lingered between them, heavy with meaning. Kale wanted to speak, to deny, to retreat into his old mask, but he found he could not. The walls of control he had built for so long felt fragile in her presence, and a part of him, a dangerous, unguarded part, wanted to reach out, to trust, to feel. The next morning, a scream echoed through the castle. Servants ran from the eastern wing, pale with terror. Kale and Alara rushed toward the sound, only to find the walls etched with glowing runes, burning with an eerie light. Shadows twisted and writhed along the stone, forming shapes that seemed almost alive. "Alara," Kale whispered, gripping her hand, "the curse, it awakens fully now, and it will test us both." She squeezed his hand, her eyes steady. "Then we face it together. Whatever comes, Kale, we endure." The castle groaned around them, as if responding to the truth in her words. And in that moment, Kale realized that the real battle, against darkness, fear, and perhaps even his own heart, had only just begun. The castle of Aelthorn had never been quieter, nor more alive. The halls pulsed with magic, the air thick with the whispers of ancient forces. Shadows twisted unnaturally along the walls, moving like living creatures. King Kale moved carefully, cane in hand, yet his senses were sharper than ever. Beside him, Alara walked with unshakable confidence, her presence steady, illuminating the darkness with a quiet, steadfast courage. For nights, the curse had tested them, probing, striking, whispering, and shifting the castle's very foundations. Kale had faced betrayal, fear, and ancient magic he barely understood. But through it all, Alara had been his guide, his equal, and more than he had dared to hope, a companion capable of seeing beyond both the shadows and the masks he had worn for so long. Tonight they reached the heart of the castle, the old chamber where the curse had first awakened. It was a vast room, walls etched with glowing runes that pulsed like the beat of a living heart. The air vibrated with power, cold yet strangely inviting. Kale's pulse quickened, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and something deeper he could not name. "Alara," he whispered, his voice low, "once we enter this chamber, there is no turning back. The curse will test us fully. Everything we are, everything we trust, will be challenged." Alara's eyes met his, unwavering. "We have survived until now," she said softly. "We endure together, and we will face whatever comes, Kale, not as servant and king, but as equals." Kale felt a warmth in her words, a fragile light in the darkness. He nodded slowly, realizing that he had spent years ruling from fear, never trusting anyone enough to share the burden of his throne. And now, he was about to do exactly that, with her. The shadows in the chamber began to move, coalescing into shapes that were both beautiful and terrifying. Figures twisted in unnatural ways, whispering names and fears, past regrets and unspoken sins. The curse had taken form, challenging them, probing their weaknesses. Kale raised his cane, though it felt almost insignificant in the face of such power. "Stand close," he said to Alara. "Do not let it separate us." She nodded, stepping beside him, their hands brushing briefly. That small touch was enough to steady him, to remind him that he was no longer alone. The shadows surged forward, swirling around them. Kale felt his mind strain, memories of betrayal, loneliness, and fear threatening to overwhelm him. But Alara's presence was like a tether, grounding him, reminding him of courage, trust, and the strength of connection. "You can fight it," she whispered, "but do not try alone. We face it together." Kale took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment. For years, he had relied only on himself. For years, he had hidden behind power, control, and solitude. And for years, the curse had been waiting, knowing that loneliness weakened even the strongest ruler. But not tonight. He opened his eyes, and for the first time he allowed himself to see clearly. Not just the shadows, not just the magic, but Alara. She was calm, unafraid, her dark hair shimmering in the pale light. She held out her hand, and the shadows recoiled slightly, as if sensing her inner strength. Kale stepped forward, taking her hand fully. Their connection sparked a wave of energy that pulsed outward, illuminating the chamber. The curse hissed and twisted, reacting to the unity it had not anticipated. "You are stronger together than you are apart," Alara said, her voice steady, clear. "Trust yourself, Kale, trust us." Kale's heart surged with emotion. He realized that the true power was not in commanding, but in opening his heart, in allowing someone to stand beside him not as a servant, but as an equal. He released the fear that had gripped him for so long, focusing instead on the bond they shared, the trust they had built in the face of shadows, secrets, and trials. The shadows wailed, twisting into chaotic shapes, trying to overwhelm them, but Kale and Alara stood firm, their hands joined, their wills aligned. Slowly, the figures began to dissolve, the runes on the walls fading as the curse lost its grip. When the last shadow disappeared, silence fell over the chamber. The oppressive weight lifted, leaving only the cold air and the soft flicker of torchlight. Kale lowered his cane, breathing heavily. He turned to Alara, seeing for the first time not a maid but the equal who had helped him survive, and the one who had taught him what it meant to trust. "You," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me." Alara smiled softly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "We saved each other," she said, "and the castle, it will never be the same again, but we are still here, together." Kale's eyes glimmered with something he had long hidden, hope. For the first time, he felt not the weight of power but the warmth of connection. The castle, though still ancient and full of secrets, felt lighter, almost alive in a new way, responsive to courage, trust, and love. In the days that followed, the staff noticed a change in the king. Kale no longer moved solely with command or suspicion. He listened more, observed more, and, perhaps most remarkably, trusted in ways he never had. The servants who had doubted him or feared him saw something different, a ruler tempered by trials, strengthened not only by power but by understanding and connection. Alara's presence was constant yet unassuming. She moved among the staff with the same quiet confidence, her insight respected by all. Yet Kale often found her waiting for him, watching, understanding, reminding him that even kings could find solace and partnership in unexpected places. One evening, as they walked the northern garden together, the pale moonlight casting silver shadows across the stone paths, Kale spoke softly. "I have ruled long enough to know that power is meaningless without someone to share it with. You have shown me that." Alara smiled, her eyes reflecting the moon. "And you have shown me that even shadows can be faced with courage. Together, we are stronger than any curse, any fear, any shadow that tries to hold us back." Kale reached for her hand, and this time he did not hesitate. Their fingers intertwined, a silent promise that no longer required words. For the first time, the loneliness that had haunted him for years felt distant, replaced by the warmth of trust, partnership, and perhaps something deeper, love. The castle itself seemed to acknowledge the change. Torches burned steadier, corridors no longer whispered threats, and the walls felt alive with energy rather than menace. The curse, once a dark and twisting presence, had been tempered, softened by the courage, trust, and connection Kale and Alara had forged. Yet even in this moment of peace, Kale knew that the world beyond the castle was not free of danger. Alliances could falter, old enemies could return, and shadows of the past could rise again. But he was no longer alone, and with Alara by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. They stood together on the balcony, looking out over the misty valley below. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon, spilling gold across the stone walls. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and new beginnings, and for the first time in many years, Kale allowed himself to breathe freely. "Alara," he said quietly, "whatever comes, we endure together, not as king and servant but as partners." She looked at him, her smile soft but confident. "Partners," she agreed. And as the sun rose over Aelthorn, the castle held a new promise, that even in shadows, trust, courage, and love could light the way. Cliffhanger ending / hint of continuation. As the light spread across the castle, Kale sensed a new presence in the distance, something ancient and silent, watching from the edge of the forest beyond. It did not move, yet its awareness was unmistakable. "Alara," he murmured, tightening his grip on her hand, "the peace we have found may only be the beginning." She nodded, eyes shining with determination. "Then we face it together." The castle stood tall, the dawn breaking over its dark stones. And together, Kale and Alara stepped forward, ready to face both the shadows of the past and the mysteries of the future.